Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar here, Spark Labs webinar on Blitzscaling. My name is Casey Lau, and I'm the co-host of the RISE conference, which is probably now the biggest tech conference in Asia. And it's produced by the Web Summit, who have the biggest tech conference in Europe. And we're doing it again in December as an online event, and we're expecting about 100,000 people to attend in that very first week. I think it's going to be the biggest startup conference on, at least online, for 2020. So hopefully you can join us. Most of the time I'm in Hong Kong, but today I am in Vancouver, or last few months I've been in Vancouver, quarantining like a lot of other people. And I want to thank Bernard Moon from Spark Labs, who has invited me to moderate today's panel on Blitzscaling. And so I'm very honored to be joined by these two gentlemen. You can see Chris Yeh. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Casey. Really looking forward to it. And I hope people enjoy the background.
Chris, where are you? Are you on Hoth or on Earth?
I'm on the ice planet Hoth. It's a little cold outside, so I'm afraid I don't have my full parka and gear on. But if it gets really cold, I'll go over to the Tauntaun, cut it open, and crawl inside.
Okay, great. That's the first Star Wars reference of many that we'll be doing today. And Alex, how are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Excited to be here with you guys.
And you're on the heat planet of New York City.
I'm in the heat planet with malfunctioning air conditioning at the moment, so double whammy.
He wishes he were on the ice planet.
I do. I'd swap in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, the weather this summer. It's quite hot. So just in case everybody doesn't know, Chris Yeh is the co-author of Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman, of course, is the founder of that social media site. What's it called again?
I think it was called SocialNet. Oh, you mean the other one, LinkedIn, yes.
LinkedIn, that's it, right. You've co-authored a book called Blitzscaling, as well as The Alliance, another great startup book. I actually had a startup founder in Hong Kong tell me that was the only book they read. They're now a unicorn in the fintech market. I'll tell you more about that later, but that was pretty amazing, yeah. Chris is also the partner at Blitzscaling Ventures. Everything's Blitzscaling. And he's also the host of the Chris Yeh podcast, surprisingly enough. It's called the Chris Yeh podcast, where he and his partner also go out and check out what companies are actually blitzscaling. So I caught a couple episodes of that, very exciting stuff. And Alex is the VP of product at Bungalow, which I usually tell people it's an Airbnb for roommates. All right, so you get the Airbnb and the roommates are already inside. It's a co-living thing. He'll tell us more about what it is, but he's also the former head of product at MasterClass, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen before. It has an amazing online education system with teachers like Gordon Ramsay on cooking and Steph Curry on playing basketball, and Samuel L. Jackson on assembling superheroes. I think that's what his class is about. It's pretty amazing stuff. So we're going to talk about blitzscaling in a pandemic, blitzscaling in the future, blitzscaling for startups, all kinds of blitzscaling stuff. But first, I wanted to put a little context for some of the people who may have not read the book or maybe a little bit curious, what is blitzscaling? And so I'm going to have Chris and Alex do a little bit of they're going to pitch to you what they're working on and what they're looking at right now. So Chris, why don't you bring up your slides and we'll start with you first.
Sure thing, Casey. So what I'm going to do is just give you guys the very, very, very brief version of blitzscaling. And afterwards, of course, you should run out to Amazon or your local bookstore and pick up your own copy. I believe, Alex, you have a copy with you?
Ready.
Voila, look at that. So Blitzscaling, of course, as Casey mentioned, is the book that I co-authored with my old friend Reid Hoffman. And when we think about blitzscaling, the way to really get it to go, and let me make sure I get my slides working. They have a tendency to mess up and do that on me. So let me get that slide in place so it's a little easier to see. Unfortunately, my collaborators like using Canva for making these presentations instead of PowerPoint, and so I always have to futz around with PDF in order to make them work. So once we get that back up and running,
That's
I'll
great.
get this underway.
I also want to just point out to the audience that trying to make this more engaging, because we can't see you, but we know that you're there. If you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of the screen, and type a question in there as we go along. I'm going to try and take a look at that. And because we're going to be bouncing around a lot on a lot of different ideas on blitzscaling, remote work, what's going on in the US, what's going on in Asia. And so if you have questions, just make sure you just type them in there and I'll refer to them. But we'll leave a few minutes at the end for just general questions. So please definitely take advantage of that, because having Alex and Chris here today is really exciting. And I have a ton of questions myself, and I'll just keep going, but I really want to hear from you, the audience, as well.
You know, what we're going to do to avoid delaying any further is I'm just going to use Adobe Acrobat as is in its full glory with all its chrome. Because, you know, really, you get the point with the slides. You don't mind having that stuff around the edges.
People love it. People love it.
So
keeps it real.
Exactly. So the interesting thing to remember, of course, is that, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with Reed's career, he's responsible for $1 trillion in market cap and counting. Actually, I have to actually check on a day-by-day basis because the stock market is gyrating so much. But he's, of course, one of the founding board members and early executives at PayPal, the first investor in Facebook, the co-founder of LinkedIn, and, of course, a major investor in Airbnb as well. So it's been a remarkable ride. And what we did in Blitzscaling is we tried to distill down basically the way Reed has approached things and figure out what is it that makes companies like this so powerful and iconic. And what we've talked about is blitzscaling. And actually, let me shrink this to fit. So I think that this will actually work better that way. Yes, there we go. So the result is blitzscaling. And to quote the great Ricky Bobby from the film Talladega Nights, if you ain't first, you're last. And the way to think about blitzscaling is this. The reason you blitzscale is if you find yourself in a winner-take-most or winner-take-all market, where the Ricky Bobby law applies. And this means that whoever gets to scale first is going to build enduring market leadership, is going to have a competitive advantage that's almost impossible to overcome. And when becoming the market leader is so profitable and so valuable, it means you should do almost anything to achieve that leadership position. And in blitzscaling, that's prioritizing speed over efficiency. It's taking on additional risk because sometimes the greatest risk is not taking on enough. But the question is, does blitzscaling always apply? And the answer is no. In fact, blitzscaling only applies in a specific set of circumstances. And so the question many people ask is, well, how do I know if they apply to me? Well, the way we do is we look at what we call the 7 different elements of blitzscaling. And these are laid out in the book, but I'm going to go over them super briefly here just so you understand. On the right-hand side, you see there are these 5 key elements that are probably key elements for any successful major business. You have product market fit, a big market, high gross margins, and operational and organizational scalability. It's really tough to build an enormously valuable company without achieving those 5 elements. So those don't set blitzscaling companies apart. What does set them apart are the 2 elements on the left, which is the winner-take-most market and the scalable distribution. The winner-take-most market comes about because there's strong network effects that make it so that the first company that achieves scale has massive competitive advantages, or alternately, sometimes there's a land grab where you get the customers, you get the territories, and nobody can take them away from you. Either way, that makes it a winner-take-most market. And what's interesting about the world today is because we are so deeply connected. I mean, here we are, we're coming in from Silicon Valley, Hoth, New York City, and Vancouver for a company, Spark Labs, which is based out of Korea but operates around the world. That's a sign of how we're all connected together. And that means more and more markets are winner-take-most markets. So more and more markets are blitzscalable. The second element is the scalable distribution. If you think about it, the goal is to achieve critical mass. So how do you achieve that? With your go-to-market. And the faster you can achieve critical mass, the less money and resources you have to spend to get there, the more valuable it is to blitzscale, the more it makes sense to blitzscale. So when you're looking at companies, you're basically looking at Do I have all the elements of a typical good business? But more importantly, do I have that winner takes most market, and do I have that scalable distribution and go-to-market plan, whether it's virality, leveraging existing networks, or both? And you can see the key difference here when you look at companies like WeWork and Airbnb, two companies that sound very similar. WeWork, of course, grew very rapidly, raised tons of money, but ultimately it has really struggled for a variety of reasons. But the primary reason, even though people say, well, WeWork struggles because they're giving away their product, they have negative gross margins, yeah, that's a problem. But the bigger problem is there's no winner take most market. Right? There's no network effects that say, if other people are at WeWork, I want to work at WeWork. In fact, you kind of don't want to work at WeWork. You'd rather nobody else work at WeWork and you have the whole place to yourself. So there's actually kind of negative network effects. And then in terms of land grab, yeah, they got leases on these great office buildings. But as I like to point out to people, if you go to a WeWork, look on the left side, there's another office building. Look on the right side, there's another office building, right? There's no way for them to lock down all the office space in a city. So because of that, they don't have the network effects. In comparison to Airbnb, where you have these strong network effects of a two-sided marketplace. And because if any of you have ever booked an Airbnb, I don't know, Alex, Casey, are you staying at an Airbnb right now, or?
I am.
When you booked that Airbnb, did you just type in Vancouver and say, pick the one that was the lowest price? Or did you look at a bunch of different places, look at the photographs, read the reviews?
Yes.
So it is a very differentiated, high value, high consideration product. That means that maximizing selection is important to you. So all the guests go to where there's the most properties, but all the hosts are going to go to where all the guests are. So there's a strong two-sided market effect, which means Airbnb scores very well on Blitzscalability. So that's a very quick nutshell on Blitzscaling. There's so much more in the book, and you should all run out and buy it, of course. But that gives us a good 5-minute grounding, and I'll turn it back over to you, Casey.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I want to go over a little bit of these special scoring process that you use, because I find it extremely interesting. And well, since you have the slide up, before you put it down, let's just kind of go over this a little bit. Do you think that this is applicable to every startup, that these things, or do you think that there's a time when it hits that you can actually compare these two like this, or have these kind of things? Or do you, I know this is what you do, you take startups that just got invested in and then try and apply this formula to them. Does it work at a seed round, or do you have to wait till like get to an A or gets into some mass traction?
So one of the ways we thought about Blitzscaling is it's on a continuum of different kinds of scaling. We call it starting up, scaling up, fast scaling, and Blitzscaling. And basically it depends on whether you're prioritizing speed or over efficiency and how much certainty you have. And so early on, what's really going on is if you look at all these different effects, you're just not sure if they actually exist or not, right? All of these are hypotheses. And so you start off not blitzscaling because you want to actually prove it out as inexpensively as possible. So that's typically your bootstrapping and your seed round. You're really trying to prove out these hypotheses about the marketplace. When you get to a series A or B, however, you ought to have knocked out enough of the uncertainty to be able to judge this. Now, that's not to say that things can't change. There's plenty of times when a company begins to grow and all of a sudden the market changes, and that could force you to come back and rethink it. But really, by the time you get to the Series A, you ought to be able to explain whether or not your company is blitzscalable.
Right. Great, interesting. Okay, Alex, why don't you pull up your slides and share with us a little bit about your background?
Would love to. Okay, great. So super nice introduction. Thank you so much, Casey. Really appreciate it. A little bit about me. So I'm a 3-time founder and engineer. I spent my last 10 years working in product leadership at high growth companies. I was originally from the UK. I've spent the last 8 years now in San Francisco, where I met Bernard and Spark Labs crew all those years ago. Currently running product and data and design and a bunch of other things at Bungalow, a co-living company, currently the largest in the US, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Spent the most of my career working on consumer products and marketplaces, a few of which I'll speak about. Key areas of interest for me, certainly designing organizations for growth, managing through their various stages from 10 to 100 to 500 to 1,000 people, thinking about the right operating manual for the organization at each level of growth as it goes through the challenges at each stage. I'm passionately obsessed with kind of lean product and engineering team management, and also the technology and engineering choices that go alongside that. How can we get maximum throughput for our product and engineering teams to allow ourselves to capitalize on what is a short window of time or a sort of serious opportunity in front of us. I'm also an active angel investor and startup advisor. I've joined boards of a couple of companies recently. My personal area of interest there is around kind of no-code analytics, automation, tooling that really helps companies grow faster, evolve faster, and save their engineering cycles for the small percentage of their work that truly can only be done by engineering teams. Teespring was kind of my first foray into blitzscaling. It grew incredibly quickly. It was the third fastest growing e-commerce company after Amazon and eBay, growing to almost $400 million in revenue. Built a huge seller base, huge growth flywheel with more sellers coming on. But ultimately, it lacked a sustainable competitive advantage. And back to the point that Chris was making before, it actually turned out not to be a winner takes most market. And so whilst the intention was to try and dominate, over time, we saw the erosion of a lot of smaller players that actually made that advantage and those economies of scale actually diminish. Next was MasterClass, super interesting company that I'm sure many of you have seen on your Instagram and Facebook timelines. During my time there, we grew from 3 classes to nearly 65, revenue 15x. And actually, this was a very interesting business because the winner takes all was actually on the supply side, on the instructor side. We created this base of instructors that were incredibly well known, the kind of best in the industry. And talent out there went to their agents and said, we don't want to be on Udemy or YouTube. We want to be on this cool club, MasterClass, which had Annie Leibovitz and Martin Scorsese and Gordon Ramsay. And so the incredible amount of effort that our team put in to lock down talent early and really build instructor side network effects allowed us to kind of dominate the market. And really in the intersection of entertainment and education, MasterClass really sits alone. And that was a great example of kind of blitzscaling there. And now working out on a product called Bungalow, so largest co-living company in the US, a two-sided marketplace. So we have homeowners that want to get a great yield for their property and leave it in safe hands, and residents who are typically looking to move between cities. They're in an earlier stage of their life. They want to share a home with other people, both from a efficiency cost perspective, but also for community, to get set up in a city for the first time. And so this is an incredibly complex business where we are not only managing the marketplace, we're also doing maintenance and cleaning and support and looking after this growing fleet of homes. And so COVID and the stresses of the last few months have really forced us to rethink how we operate. And I would say have forced us to really achieve kind of 3 or 4 years worth of innovation and growth in our kind of operating model in an incredibly short space of time. So that's a little bit about me. Super happy to answer questions as we go through this, but I've really kind of tried to be at the coalface of companies that are dealing with intense pressure through scaling their operations and trying to build a playbook that's as reusable for more and more companies that are going through the same thing.
I don't know why they put us together on a panel of 2 guys. I could spend an hour talking to each of you separately. So we're going to have to really cram through this stuff really fast. So answer them really quickly because I'm going to give you a lot of questions. Alex, all 3 of those companies I love. And so I want you to give me one tip from each one on growth. For Teespring, what was because a lot of people are trying to do this now, right? But it could be applied to different kinds of e-commerce concepts. What's the one growth hack you would recommend in that specific vertical?
Find your power sellers, your super passionate advocates that are prepared to sort of spend day and night. We used to print t-shirts that said eat, sleep, Teespring, repeat, because people would spend 20 hours a day on our platform. Find that group and they will take you to the moon. It worked for eBay, it worked for Amazon, it worked for Shopify.
So good. That's great advice. Okay, now how about MasterClass? I mean, obviously the name brands of these people will pull me in, but there must be some other thing besides Instagram ads.
Everybody wants to look good, including your instructors. And so if you can take any influencer, be they Gordon Ramsay or any of us really, in our smaller ways, and make us look 10 times better than we can do by ourselves, you're going to win every single time.
Yeah, he looks a lot better on MasterClass than he does in his own show. That's
Absolutely.
Sure. And then
if you actually look on YouTube, there's much of the same content that exists in the masterclass, candidly, but it's the production value, it's the added materials that really makes a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how about Bungalow then? What are you seeing right? I mean, I guess this is a kind of a tricky question. How was it pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID and even during COVID, I think we are in the business of putting people in homes together. And that is an incredibly intimate relationship to try and get right off the bat. And we underinvested, candidly, in that roommate matching experience up until about 6 months ago. But the early results of us taking that much more seriously and actually thinking about how would like Chris and Alex get on living in a house together? What time do they want to go to bed? Who makes the most mess? Yeah, exactly. I'd watch that show too. I think really taking those core relationships that you're trying to foster, whether you're a dating network, a professional network, or a group housing network, really thinking about and being thoughtful about how you pair people is a massive point of leverage in that system.
Great. Okay, I just want to remind the audience, because I see there's even more people in here now than there was when we started. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom. I'd love to hear from you as well. Try and keep this as engaging as possible. Otherwise, I have a whole bunch of questions and I want you to tell me what to ask these two guys. But we're going to go ahead to the next section now that we know who they are. We know about blitzscaling. We kind of want to know what, looking today, right now in the middle of the pandemic, what are we looking at in terms of blitzscaling now and into 2021? Chris, I've heard a lot of startups. I was just at the Techstars demo day this morning, Toronto's demo day, and they are like, everybody's doubling down on what they're doing. That's what founders are telling them. That's what investors are telling them. Is this true? Are they getting the wrong advice? What are you seeing?
So I think it's something you have to be able to judge for yourself by gauging to what extent the pandemic has affected your business. Look, we all know that there's a huge contrast between what the pandemic has done to, say, a restaurant and what it's done for Zoom. It's just night and day. And so the fact that there's a pandemic and an economic crisis doesn't mean that your business is necessarily affected. Or if it is affected, there may be other ways to play it. So for example, one of the things that I've been telling people is if you want to think about how you're going to play this pandemic, ask yourself, what are the things that I can do now and over the next 12 months that I won't be able to do once this pandemic goes away? Right? Reframing it to think about the pandemic as an opportunity in addition to an obstacle is one of the ways to go about it. Now, I do think that one of the great things about blitzscaling is it is a relative thing. So it's all about basically running a sprint against your competition and being able to get to the finish line first. But the most important thing is, are you opening up the distance on your competition or are they catching up with you? Now, in a time like this, when there's a lot of uncertainty, when there's a lot of change about, when there may be financial pressures, people who are strong players can use this to get even further ahead. And I compare it to if you're familiar with sailing, when you have boats, you know, every boat can put up a sail and run before the wind, when the wind is at your back. But when the wind is blowing into you, the people who are really nimble are the ones who are able to tack upwind most effectively and gain that distance that then opens up even wider when the pandemic recedes. So I think you can double down.
So what companies right now do you think are doing the best job sailing with the wind right now as we speak in early September now, 2020?
Well, I think we looked at something like Airbnb. With Airbnb, you look at a company, you think this company is in trouble. It's a travel company and nobody's going to be traveling anywhere. And they very successfully pivoted to longer term stays, to people trying to escape their cities. And you're a customer right now. I think you're a customer as well. And it's amazing that despite this pandemic, their revenues are actually higher this year than they were last year.
What? That's crazy. Sorry.
So it's a great example of taking advantage. And then there's other folks. I mean, obviously with somebody like Zoom or a company like Roblox, they're just going gangbusters because everyone needs to communicate. And then everyone's kids, as somebody put it, I know my kids aren't going to school this fall. They're going to YouTube University. They're going to Roblox University. They're going to Nintendo Switch College. That's what's actually happening.
How about you, Alex? In your industry right now, in your vertical around there, what are you seeing in terms of what companies are doing it right as you look out from Bungalow's vision?
Yeah, I can. One thing that's very interesting about the sort of blitzscaling experience is that you're constantly in a state of change anyway. So you're reinventing everything in your business every 6 months. You're reorganizing, you're rewriting playbooks. And so for a business that has been business as usual for 10 years, COVID's going to feel like a completely different experience. But actually, if you're used to constant change and you have that organizational muscle to reorganize regularly, COVID's going to feel like, yes, a completely unforeseen set of circumstances, but actually you're probably in some ways more likely to adapt. And so I think for our experience recently has been, we've had to really hustle very hard to adapt. And for example, in-person showings for anyone in real estate have gone completely off the table. And so pivoting to doing virtual tours, 3D modeling of the homes, virtual staging, where we'll actually put furniture in empty units to show people has been something we had to roll out literally in 72 hours to get things back on track. And also when we talk to investors, there is definitely a sense that the capital markets are tightening. And so if you're a great company and you're crushing it, of course you'll be able to raise. But other companies, really, this is an opportunity to prove that you have a world-class team that can adapt and that can really take advantage of a crisis. And so, when I think about the companies that are doing incredibly well, obviously Zoom, also something like Shopify as well, companies that enable that digital transformation that potentially have been sitting on a long-term trend like the move to online commerce, but have actually now seen that trend compress into a matter of 3 or 4 months as companies race to adapt to this new world. I think the kind of WeWork situation is incredibly interesting. I was just reflecting on your slide earlier, Chris, because it's for every new company in a particular vertical, which Bungalow is arguably in kind of the same vertical as WeWork, has to inherit all of the kind of understanding and learnings from the previous generation. And so, when we think about kind of, question I have for you actually is when we think about this idea of prioritizing growth over efficiency, in light of the Ubers and the WeWorks and these companies that really had poor unit economics for such a long time, but were able to weaponize capital just to kind of keep going. I feel like our experience has been, we have that shadow over our business and have actually been forced to focus on profitability far earlier than potentially we would have if we built this business 5 or 6 years ago. Just curious if you feel the same way.
Absolutely. So the capital markets environment has a huge impact on how things are built. I think that where a company like WeWork went wrong is not in the notion of let's sacrifice unit economics for growth. It's a question of let's sacrifice unit economic for growth, but for what purpose, right? If your only purpose is to rack up revenue growth and convince people to put money in at ever higher multiples, guess what? Eventually that runs out because you're going to have to try to sell it to the public markets. And when WeWork tried to do that, the public markets said, wait a minute, what are these economics? Yeah. So I think that it always boils down to, can you find what I call, in a term I borrow from the drug industry, the mechanism of action, right? If you are able to say, when we achieve scale, the following good things happen, and this is why they give us a sustainable competitive advantage, then you should continue to strive to achieve scale faster than the competition. But if you're one of these people who just says, well, I just want to get big fast, I just want to grow, growth is its own reward, I'm like, no, it's not. In fact, growth is only its own reward if it's profitable growth. If it's not profitable growth, then there better be a strategic value you're getting out of that growth.
Yep. It's great that you brought up the drug analogy, because there's a question from the audience specifically about that. So the verticals we're looking at in terms of, I guess, easier to blitzscale at this COVID time, e-commerce perhaps, and Airbnb rental, things like that. There's a specific question about biotech startups. Generally they're saying it requires them a much longer time for R&D than the software tech startup. How do you think they would continue to keep the wind going, to keep their business going at this time?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating topic, because biotech is one of those spaces where there's a conventional wisdom about how it's done. And then there's the question of, can it be done differently in the future? And I've seen a number of biotech companies doing things like, well, can we apply computation and AI to drug discovery? Can we do, virtual trials or basically virtual reality trials before we get to that point so we can really narrow down the kinds of drugs we're looking at? But I also look at a company like Moderna, which is very much in the news because they have a messenger RNA vaccine for COVID-19 that they're working on. And this is a case where a company really deployed the tools of blitzscaling. And in fact, the government, I'll say one good thing for this government, it actually has put money behind these different vaccine makers because they believe that it is better to be wasteful because speed is more important than efficiency. And that's something they learned from Bill Gates. So with Moderna, they had the genome sequenced, and the Chinese published a genome sequence, and within 48 hours, they had their first vaccine candidate. Right? That's an example of speed. Was it efficient to do it that way? Probably not. And then in the broader spectrum of vaccine development, we have all these companies where the government and private individuals are already paying to build factories to manufacture the vaccines before they're approved. Is that efficient? Hell no. But given the importance of speed and given the immense cost to the economy of this pandemic, it's logical to do things like that. Now, of course, COVID-19 is an unusual case. Outside of that pandemic, where is it that what is it you're trying to do as a biotech company? What you're trying to do is essentially say, what is the source of competitive advantage? And can I get there faster than my competition? Because it's always relative. As a biotech company, you're not competing with a consumer internet company in terms of speed. You're competing with other biotech companies. And if you can continue to move faster than they can, and you can identify that mechanism of action, then it makes sense to blitzscale.
How about you, Alex? You mostly work with consumer brand-based startups. Do you have any other verticals that you're looking at that you think may be more challenging in this time to blitzscale up?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about MasterClass, obviously a company that I spent a long time building, and it's no secret that people are spending far more time with digital devices, getting through their to-do lists like never before. And in some ways, it's the perfect product for a pandemic, other than a vaccine, because people can spend their spare cycles actually learning and improving themselves. So I think the whole online learning sector and even the offline learning sector has been through this enormous evolution in the last 6 months. My mother is a university professor and is finally on Microsoft Teams and recording herself on Zoom. This is unimaginable a year ago, let me tell you. And so I think we're seeing these companies who are set up the perfect fly trap for the immense amount of disposable time that people now have and have been benefiting from it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of conferencing startups coming to me looking for advice and things like that, because it's just everybody's going to need a way to like meet online. But the problem is I find a lot of these people just see the gap in the market and they try to build something for that hole, but they don't actually know anything about events, business, networking, or actually have been to one. They just see that as an opportunity. So I find that to be, there's opportunities out there for things to slide into, which I'm going to get into later. But there's another question just popped up here. What are your thoughts on blockchain startups being ideal for blitzscaling for either one of you?
So one of the things that's been very gratifying is I know there are a number of founders in the blockchain and crypto space that are big enthusiasts for blitzscaling. So of course, I always want to give them a shout out and say I see them and I'm very happy that they're excited about it. Look, it comes down to what is the purpose to which you're using the blockchain project, or what is the purpose to which you're using the cryptocurrency. And obviously in the very broad sense of using it as a unit of transferring value or a store of value, I mean, again, you can argue that something like the US dollar is an example of something that is a product that through its dominance has been able to maintain a competitive position. And so I think that many of the same things apply in the cryptocurrency world. In the blockchain world, it's a similar sort of thing. With blockchain, it's more of an enabling technology. And so the question becomes, can you build on top of blockchain technology some of these other network effects, whether it is a marketplace or a platform, something that has those network effects. But the converse, that's the bull side. The bear side on blockchain, I've always said, listen, whatever you're using the blockchain for, is there a clear reason why doing so is superior than just using AWS? Because if there isn't a clearly good reason why it's better than AWS, why are you going to bother doing it? So as long as you can identify the source of competitive advantage, it makes sense to blitzscale, it makes sense to get into blockchain, but you always have to identify the source of competitive advantage. Just saying the magic word is not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd be more bullish on blockchain as a store of value if the sort of major cryptocurrencies didn't track pretty closely to the US stock market. I think volatility in theory is good for crypto, but that hasn't panned out in reality, although it could be eating my words a few years from now.
We're hosting this with Spark Labs, based out of South Korea. I want to talk a little bit about international opportunities for blitzscaling. I don't know, Chris, do you look at a lot of companies from, say, Korea or China or Japan that are looking to blitzscale? What do you see as are they trying to blitzscale into the U.S. market? All this talk about TikTok, they're blitzscaling, but somebody won't let them blitzscale properly, so maybe it's going to be owned by Walmart. I don't know. What are you looking at in those worlds?
Yeah, so that is absolutely one of the most fascinating stories to watch, and seeing how it's going to turn out. I don't think the story's been told. One of the podcasts I love listening to is Kara Swisher's podcast, Pivot. She hosts with Scott Galloway, professor out of NYU. Great, hilarious podcast. And I think they have the right take on it, which is TikTok's just going to run out the clock on the Trump administration and see what happens with the election. They're just doing everything to push it out and see what's going to occur. Now, I do think that Asia in general is a great place for blitzscaling. In fact, I have an organization called the Global Scaling Academy, where we basically invite people from all around the world to join our community and learn about blitzscaling. And it's because, again, while Silicon Valley has been historically the source of a lot of these blitzscaling companies, nowadays, so many of them are coming from over in Asia, whether it's China, of course, everyone's very focused on China with Ant Financial getting ready to go public, or whether it's Indonesia or Singapore, or Hong Kong, South Korea, all these different places. Now, what are the characteristics that they need to have in order to blitzscale? The thing that makes China the easiest one to focus on is a gigantic domestic market, which its government has chosen to protect from outside competition. That obviously makes it a great place to blitzscale if you're on the right side of that government. But in other places, even in a relatively smaller country like South Korea, which is still a very rich country, has a good domestic market. It just needs to start thinking about globalization sooner. And so the biggest difference in these global blitzscalers is really, are you thinking about how you're going to crack the big markets around the world faster? You can't just sit back and say, well, first I'm going to conquer the United States or China and then go from there.
Alex, how does a MasterClass with mostly American instructors blitzscale out to like South Korea or China?
It's a great question. And in fact, we had this at Teespring as well. I think there is a general wariness of going international too soon now. I think a lot of companies kicked off those threads internally, funded them, and actually found that the challenge was far greater than they originally assumed. And so my experience has been over the last 10 years, seeing companies actually try and do that later and later, either through, and the entry point either being acquisition or a much more focused attempt at cracking one of the big other markets. I think for MasterClass, the unit economics and the go-to-market strategy and the instructor network effects all have been very, very US-centric initially, but then what they saw in the last few years has been growing demand in English-speaking countries and countries with largely English-speaking populations, and that seems to be the entry point for them to go and then internationalize through first subtitles and then sort of dubbing and then hopefully make the jump into international instructors. But at some point, there's a sort of local maximum reach and local market. They've got to keep showing progress. They will definitely make the jump, and kind of excited to see them do that. But bear in mind, MasterClass has reached a Series E. They've just raised $150 million. And they've only done 85 classes. And so this is almost the inverse of so many online learning platforms, which really went for thousands and thousands and thousands of classes. And so I think it could be further out than we might think. even post IPO potentially.
And I just want to comment on MasterClass for a second, because I find it absolutely fascinating. And it is so interesting on so many levels. First of all, it's a fat head versus long tail business, as you point out, with a very limited number of highly prestigious classes. But by going in the contrarian direction, opposite of what everyone else is doing, they really carved out a unique niche. And the second thing is, everyone else thought about it as education. MasterClass really realized this is more about how you're making the person feel. At the end of the day, the person watching Gordon Ramsay, are they going to make better eggs? Possibly. But they really got something out of the experience. They got a level of comfort. And people often say, well, this is just entertainment. Like, just entertainment. On a basic level of economics, value creation is just the difference between the willingness to pay and the opportunity cost to supply it. And so when you're satisfying people's desires in a way that does not harm them, that is value creation.
I think they also successfully tied into people's sort of vision of their future self in a very magical way. We all imagine ourselves to be a slightly better cook, a slightly faster runner, a slightly better basketball player. And the emotion in their Facebook marketing, actually, their go-to-market strategy, those ads, those trailers in the Facebook feed, was just phenomenal. I mean, the Gordon Ramsay trailer had 20 million organic views in the first 72 hours, which is unheard of for what's essentially an online learning class. Those numbers just didn't happen previously. And people see that, they see the value that it could bring them. They see themselves doing those things. And then they're prepared to pay. It actually taps into something very deep in so many of us, and that need to self-improve. In the same way that I, go to the airport and buy lots of books for my flight, it's that desire to sort of accumulate knowledge, improve oneself, and kind of actualize that future self that we all want to keep alive.
Every time I'm in Seoul for a Spark Labs demo day, there's always some K-pop startup in their batch, like always. Why hasn't there been a masterclass for K-pop? I'm telling you, people, come on, Korea, get it together.
They got to sign BTS. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, it probably would be the biggest one ever.
I feel like there's an opportunity now, because of what you just said, Alex, that a lot of countries can localize popular startups from America that, found out it's very difficult to go into a new market like a China, like a Korea, or like a Japan. And kind of like maybe even just wait for an acquisition in when those startups want to move in there, especially if they're Series E or F or going IPO. What do you think about that? I mean, you might think of it as a clone in the past, but today I feel like it's a easy market entry for some of these bigger startups.
Absolutely. I think I have one company a week reach out to me about their masterclass for X or Y. I've had religion, I've had esports, I've had internationalized versions. So I think, I think this is kind of the second bounce of the ball. So MasterClass kind of established this model, people get it, it resonates with the market. And then there's a number of sort of second bounces. And so I absolutely think that's an opportunity. I think we are just at the beginning of high production value, quality educational experiences. I think it's beyond just content. I think it's going to be experiences that involve many technologies beyond video, and I'm excited to see what people do. So I think what people underestimate is how hard it is to do well, and the cost to create masterclasses is probably 5 or 6x what anybody would guess. And so people sort of go into it and say, can I do one of these things for $20,000? The case is absolutely not. I think to actually do something of that level, that caliber, and actually achieve the instructor side network effects that they saw takes a huge amount of dedication and painstaking attention to detail. Let me tell you.
A reminder to everybody that Alex doesn't work there anymore, by the way.
I do not.
In case you're wondering.
But do you still own some equity in the company?
I do, yeah.
Again,
Long and strong.
I recommend everyone go over to MasterClass and sign up.
We're going to talk offline.
After you've bought the book.
Oh, great plugs. I love it.
It's fantastic. But I do think that if we think about MasterClass, I mean, look, here's the interesting thing. People think about MasterClass, education company. I'm like, no. MasterClass is more like Netflix original entertainment or Amazon originals, right? That's what we're talking about, where you're actually bringing that level of production value. You're thinking of the show itself as something that is of such high quality and entertainment value that people want to see it. And it's not about, again, people don't go to a streaming service and say, oh, this has 50 million pretty crappy shows, so of course I'm going to sign up for it. They only care about the ones that have the shows they really love.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm going to take another question from the audience here. This is from Brian in Taipei. He wants to know, how do you make sure the customer experience stays the same when you're blitzscaling from, say, 100 customers up to 100,000 customers? I think that's part of the network effect that you're talking about before, Chris. So Chris and Alex, you can both answer this question. But Chris, who's first?
So I'm happy to go first. So one of the things we talk about in the book is the need to go from inspiration to data. And it's really about the need to go from things that are handcrafted at the start to things that are mass produced or mass customized in the end. And so obviously one of the things that happens is when you have 100 customers, you can overserve them. The founders themselves can be involved. Everyone always loves it when the founders or CEO is involved, but that's just not something that's scalable. So what you need is the ability to actually continue to make sure that the experience is of high enough quality, but also find ways to automate it. Now, the first part of it is pretty straightforward. You should be using tools in the online world of things like Full Story, for example, so you can actually watch individual sessions. Don't just rely on the statistics of DAU, MAU. Yeah, those are great, but there's nothing like actually seeing people use it. And the other thing I often recommend that executives do is to spend a day with their customer service team. Find out what kinds of problems people are running into. But let me tell you, if you spend the entire day with people telling you what's wrong with your product, you're going to get a different perspective on it. And then the final thing is, as I mentioned, you really have to start thinking about, well, what is it that we've done in overserving them that really has helped them? What's the insight here? Is it that we've papered over this particular problem in the interface? Okay, great. Now we need to fix that problem in the interface. Again, it's all about finding that mechanism of action. And if you're able to do that, you can deliver a great experience. I mean, MasterClass is an example where because of the very first core, who was the very first person that was an instructor for MasterClass?
There was three. It was Usher, Serena Williams, and James Patterson, the author.
There you go. So obviously at that point in time, the entire company is focused on those three. And since then, you've had to grow and expand and be able to do it more effectively. But what you did is you took your learnings from those first three and then say, okay, now we're going to create a playbook, but we're going to give people, whoever's in charge of that shoot, they're essentially the producer or director of a mini movie. We're going to give them creative control and the ability to do it. It's no different than an Amazon or a Netflix.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, actually, I remember when I first joined the company, a launch of a class would be everyone in the office till 2 a.m. for one class. And by the time I left, we did 7 in one day and nobody noticed. And so, just to Chris's point, I think early days, learn the customer, do things that don't scale, quote Paul Graham, and really internalize that voice, internalize that customer if it isn't you. And then when it comes to scaling, I think the thing I've seen is, especially in an ops heavy business, there's a ton of things that need to get automated and built extremely quickly. And sometimes having a sort of traditional, we don't buy, we build mentality is extremely dangerous because it just takes far too long for the organization to respond to the scaling challenges. So a big thing I do when I set up my teams is I figure out, okay, we have maybe 4 engineering pods that can operate. How can we create another 4 or 10 or 20 lanes of development through empowering other people in the organization to build for themselves, to start finding those efficiencies to actually service our customers at scale? But it doesn't always go perfectly. We certainly had periods at Bungalow where we've not scaled things sufficiently quickly, and we've had to respond very, very, very fast because there isn't complete parity across every part at every level of scale. Sometimes things slip, sometimes things are ahead or behind. And so having extremely good metric, dashboarding, reporting, access to data throughout the organization, fantastic instrumentation of funnel analytics and data is really key. So you can devolve a lot of that responsibility to other people in the company, and everyone can kind of own and be a mini GM of their corner of the business.
Very good. Wow, fantastic. Somebody in the Q&A just pointed out that there is a K-pop instructor in MasterClass teaching music production. So
Oh, great.
all covered already.
Nice.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Not wrap it up, but I'm going to the final segment that I want to talk about with you guys, and it's about the remote work situation right now. Okay, so I think this is a good audience to talk about this, because a lot of people are in Asia. Maybe they have teams in North America or Europe or anywhere in the world. I mentioned you guys, right, the big story about Pinterest giving up their lease. San Francisco is in exodus, all these kind of crazy things going on. Chris, how important is it for the entire team to be together, to be on the same page, to Blitzscale? And how do you see remote work affecting it negatively or positively?
So I think one of the fascinating things we've learned in all of this is that the main reason why remote work has failed in the past is because it created this two-caste system. There were people who were there at headquarters and people who weren't at headquarters. And as a result, anybody who worked remotely was always out of sight, out of mind. They couldn't participate to the same level, and it just didn't work as a result. And people would often ask about this, and I would give them the advice. I would tell them, for all your staff meetings, have everyone do them remotely, even if they're in the same building, and put everyone on the same level, and you'll get used to it, and then you'll be able to have everyone work together. And nobody ever took me up on that advice. Nobody ever did it. And then this pandemic came along and forced everyone to do it. Yeah. So I think that it will still be possible to build companies in this remote distributed environment because of the fact that people are on an equal footing. Now, is it ideal? No, I still think that the best circumstances for moving quickly are a group of people who are physically co-located. I think that the bandwidth of communication is just so much higher with all the nonverbal side of things. You could just stand over someone's shoulder in a way that there isn't the friction of having to share a screen and do all this stuff. So there's no question in my mind, when we are able to get back to having people work together in person, the companies that move the fastest will strongly incorporate in-person interaction. But, you know, we don't live in a perfect world. And if your best bet for building your company is getting a bunch of people to collaborate after hours, or you have people in different continents or something like that, guess what? You can still make it work. And I think everyone should take away from their experiences during this pandemic and say, now that we've learned much better how to work remotely, let's apply that, but apply it in cases where we have to, as opposed to just default to everything.
Interesting. How about you, Alex? Are you, where's the Bungalow team now? Are they obviously distributed? It's in the Bay Area, but I'm sure, and you're in New York, but how about everybody else?
So actually, to just pick up on the two-car system comment, we always had HQ in San Francisco, and then we had our engineering team out in Ontario in Canada. And one of the first comments that my counterpart on the engineering side said to me was like, he loves everyone being remote because now he is on equal footing and he feels like he isn't missing out on anything. Well, of course, one of our board members,
birthday cakes. He's got,
exactly.
That's his number one missing thing in the office is the birthday cakes.
The big birthday celebrations, yeah, they tend to disappear at like 250 people, sadly. But so I think the remote folks are actually enjoying the sort of parity this creates. One thing that really excites, I couldn't agree more, by the way, with Chris's sentiment on there is no replacement for in-person for a certain type of work. I do think, though, it's incredibly exciting that the entire workforce has now been trained how to work remote. I think it's a skill. I think it takes practice, takes new tooling. We have to learn how to manage Zoom fatigue and taking better notes and actually replacing some of the serendipitous communication that happens. But now that people know how to function remote, I think it's going to allow for more flexible, creative working arrangements, which will mean that the role of the office will change. And also, people will be able to leave the office to do deep work at home and come back in for collaboration and get that kind of team rah-rah. One of our board members is Keeper Boyce, and he said to us that, the better your office culture is, the harder that this period of sort of forced work from home is going to be. And Bungalow had an exceptional office. It was a great experience to be there. I love the energy. And it's been a real challenge for the organization to redesign itself where we don't have that day-to-day interaction. We don't have that kind of office vibe and culture and music playing and things like that.
You're just missing the snacks. That's why, the free snacks.
I'm missing the snacks and the tunes and the jokes. Yeah,
goldfish crackers.
Yeah, totally. So excited to get back, but excited to find a hybrid, I think.
That's interesting.
Well, I wanted to say one thing about the birthday cakes, because it is too good a story to pass up. One of the things that came up, my co-author, Reid Hoffman, did his podcast, Masters of Scale. And one of the people he interviewed was Sheryl Sandberg. And one of the things that Sheryl brought up was she's like, the birthday cakes, that was a problem. He's like, what do you mean? She said, well, when we started off with the birthday cakes, we'd get everyone a birthday cake. And then it got to be so many people that we stopped doing birthday cakes for everyone. We had to do like one birthday cake each month for everyone. But that was a big sign to everyone. Oh my God, we've gotten a big company. If we just started off with like doing birthdays once a month with one cake for everyone, nobody would have noticed the difference. So it's amazing how important birthday cakes are to culture.
I think that we should have a new podcast called Masters of Scaling Birthday Cakes, because I think that would be very important. And I'll add to that quickly. So Web Summit in Dublin, the headquarters has 250 people. And what they've done to solve this problem, which is interesting, that Facebook couldn't figure this out, is that HR gives every team a budget for birthdays. So every team buys their own cake for their own people. So when I'm in the office, when I visit Dublin, it's crazy because there's 5 people every day that has a birthday. And they usually time it right after lunch or before the end of work, right? So you hear happy birthday, everybody's cheering, but it keeps playing over and over because it's like one big room that everybody can kind of hear everybody.
Decentralized birthday cakes. Just throw it on the blockchain and we got $1 billion opportunity.
Icing at scale.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I've got a few more questions on my side and a few more questions from the audience. I want to talk quickly about Bay Area. Because Alex, we communicated an email before, and you had a couple of important things to say about that. Fires and COVID and people leaving and exoduses and things like that. Will the Bay Area still be the startup mecca when this kind of goes away?
I think cities are resilient and the network effects are strong, and I think this certainly will put a dent in the Bay Area's crown, but I don't think it dislodges it. The sort of walking into Blue Bottle Coffee and stumbling into an investor, or the sort of meeting founders at dinner parties. It's a very small community. It's very unique, and the concentration of talent and capital still will be unique in the world. Hopefully, I think this will broaden people's horizons a little bit more. I think there should be more distributed startup hubs across the US and the world. But I don't fundamentally think this will change the Valley's role and history and its sort of long history of producing billion-dollar companies.
So I should buy an apartment there now while the prices are down.
I think you might have a longer recovery than other cities, judging by the data I'm looking at. But certainly from a startup perspective, I think it will still be a very important place.
How about you, Chris?
I would agree with that. I would also distinguish between residential real estate and commercial real estate. I think commercial real estate's going to have a larger decline and a longer recovery period. I think it's quite possible that we'll see a depressed effect for commercial real estate for the next 5 years or so, because of the fact that people are like, well, I don't need an office, and it is a big expense. But that being said, I also see things coming back. So when you think about it, at the end of the day, it's all about talent, and it's a question of where people want to live. And they want to live someplace that, of course, has natural beauty and amenities, but they also want to live where other people who are working on the same kinds of things and doing exciting stuff are living. And I get it that there's this thing right now. Take New York City, for example. Alex, you're in New York City. There's this whole narrative, oh my God, everyone's emptied out of New York City. I'm like, no. Don't tell me that all the people who went to someplace in upstate New York to ride out the pandemic are going to say, you know what? Forget Manhattan. I'm going to stay up here in upstate New York from now on. Maybe there's a small fraction of people, but that just means a whole bunch of other people who couldn't afford to move to New York are going to do so. Cities remain a magnetic force because of the strong network effects of all these people together. Cities where they have a strong emphasis on a particular industry actually have a stronger network effect than other cities. So I think that there's still a lot of bullishness I would have around San Francisco, around New York, around all these cities around the world once we get past the pandemic.
People will be excited to come back, I think. I know I am.
I think what we're doing at Web Summit is looking at hybrid events because as a conference that you guys have probably attended in the past, yeah, running into somebody in the bathroom or at the dinner or at the happy hour is pretty exciting to meet. Like I can meet you guys. We're lucky we can meet each other because we're all like panel people. We'll talk to each other. But, you know, just meeting that new startup that comes up to you, goes, Chris, I read your book. I really loved it. And, you know, I'm working on this. You're like, oh, tell me more about it. And then it becomes your next big thing or whatever. So, yeah, I feel like those kind of things are, because this is it, right? There are 48 people watching this, and we are only being able to take the Q&A. We won't be able to hang out with them with a beer after this, which is kind of sad. So that part has to be solved as well. Okay, so to wrap this up, I just want to take a couple more questions, make sure people are answered, but there are quite a few of them in here now, and I'm sorry.
We'll do a lightning round.
We'll do a lightning round. Okay, great idea. Okay, so Chris, thoughts around SaaS, which is a subscription-based system, and how to further Blitzscale?
SaaS is a fantastic business model for blitzscaling. Subscriptions work great because you get greater revenue, greater revenue predictability and greater retention. The key is figuring out what's your distribution strategy. You have to have some sort of virality or some sort of network you're tapping into, because SaaS economics are slightly more challenging in the short run than the traditional software sales. And so you got to figure out a better, more efficient go-to-market.
Alex, any backup on that?
Lots of great SaaS products out there with poor distribution, don't go anywhere. Get your payback periods sorted, find your route to market, go to the moon. Couldn't agree more.
Next question. I'm currently validating my market, still trying to gather feedback. How can that be scaled up before I build it?
Well, let's let Alex go first, because it's not fair for me to speak first. He always has to say, well, that was a great
Alex,
idea.
go for it.
That was a great idea. I think, so validation is something that can be done at scale. You know, you create landing pages, you can start to do some paid spend to see what kind of click-through rates, what kind of sort of sign-up rates you're getting. There are entire businesses that are launched on Product Hunt that don't exist yet. So you can actually put product out there, get feedback. And, you know, ultimately the best signal you're going to get is someone saying they're willing to pay for it. So see if you can get commitments from customers early, saying, if you build this, I will subscribe. You know, Lattice, one of the fastest growing people management software companies in the Bay, actually signed up nearly 100 customers before they even had a product. And that showed that there was a real need in the market and that they would have a business if they built this. So you not having a product is not a barrier to getting validation, which you can do at scale with paid, or you can do one-on-one with early commitments.
Agree 100%. And what I would say is the other thing that you need to do as the entrepreneur or founder is to begin developing relationships with the influencers in your industry. There is no reason why you shouldn't be able to reach out to them. People are more open to being reached out to than ever before because they're stuck at home and they're bored. So there's no excuse. Go do it.
Fantastic. Okay, let's wrap it up there. Alex, where can the viewers find you on maybe social media or blogs? Where can we talk to you more about after this?
Yeah, just hit me up on Twitter. It's probably best, just at Alex Halliday, my name. I'm happy to chat about ideas, things you're facing. I've seen a lot of companies grow up from 0 to 1 in product and in the SaaS world, community, legal tech, all sorts of things. So always happy to take questions, and I'll try and be as helpful as possible.
What's your favorite podcast?
Ooh, Masters of Scale, obviously.
Nice. Good one. And how about you?
The plug.
And Chris, there's so many things to reach you out. So we got the Blitzscaling book. If you haven't read that, get on that. The Alliance, get on that. The Chris Yeh podcast, get on that. Where else can we find you? LinkedIn? Are you on LinkedIn?
You can find me on LinkedIn, but the simplest thing to do is just go to chrisyeh.com, CHRISYEH.com. You get pointers to everything else. As I mentioned, there's the Global Scaling Academy. That's just globalscalingacademy.com. That's actually going to be launching an online community the next month or so. So check it out there. And you can also follow me on Twitter and pretty much everywhere else. I'm pretty early, so I'm almost always just Chris Yeh.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time. Final question. Are you going to see Tenet in the theaters or Mulan at home on Disney Plus this weekend?
Mulan all the way. Not risking going to the theaters.
Alex?
Mulan for me as well.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
Excellent. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I believe this is going to be released on YouTube after, so if you missed it or you have a friend that you should have watched it, it was great, it'll be on later again. Thank you again to Spark Labs. Thank you to Alex. Thank you to Chris. I'm Casey Lau. Talk to you again soon.
Live long and prosper.
Okay, Gandalf.
Thanks, guys.